Today's grammar point covers the tag GW, how does what, how often, 副词频率. So we've been talking a lot about adverbs, and there are different types of adverbs, the kind that can express tone of voice, in what range something happens, to what degree something happens, but this one is about frequency. So do you always do something? How about sometimes? How about often? How about seldom? These are all possible adverbs that you could use to express these ideas. And so we're going to look through some sentences to get a sense of how these adverbs of frequency work. But I will just mention that there are a lot of adverbs of frequency that are not yet covered in phase 4 of the course, which is where this particular video is going to live. But it doesn't matter, because the key with grammar is to unconsciously first and maybe consciously second recognize a pattern and know what you can stick into the different patterns. Because luckily, Chinese grammar is really simple. There are no declensions, there's not a lot of word form changes, there's no genders. So as a result, you can quite easily treat grammar like a puzzle game. And it's like, okay, what fits into this particular slot? And what could I change out? What puzzle pieces could I switch out and change the meaning, but ultimately still be an adverb of frequency? Well, once you spot the pattern, then any new word you get is just a new puzzle piece that you can add, but you've already got the pattern in place, so it doesn't matter that you don't know all these other words. So we'll go over some of them at the end, but don't worry about it if you don't recognize some of them. But first we're going to cover sentences that are in the course and that you've seen already. So the first sentence, 我常常想起来她说过的话. This sentence means I often think of what she said. So without 常常, this just means I think of what she said. 我常常想起来她说过的话. That 常常 makes it so that it is now a thing that occurs often or frequently, and it makes sense because 常 as a character means ordinary or common. So double ordinary, 常常. Well, sure, that makes sense why that would mean often. So that one is very frequent. By the way, that's the same 常 as in 非常, which we talked about in the adverbs of degree video. Now let's look at the next sentence. 你总是吃米饭. So 你总是吃米饭 just means you always eat rice. You don't just eat rice, that would be 你吃米饭. It's you always eat rice. So there's a sister sentence here, which is 你老是吃米饭. Now you haven't learned the word 老是 yet, but this word is the exact same meaning, except it definitely implies a negative connotation. 总是 isn't necessarily negative or positive, it's more just a statement about the frequency, but 老是 also has an additional connotation that this is a negative thing, that, for example, you always eat rice. So the difference between them is that the first one could just be a statement of fact, whereas the second one is a statement of judgment to a large degree. And so you're not a fan of something if you say 老是. Now, another thing to mention about 总是 is that it can be used literally, as in like New Year's Day is always January 1st, or a rhetorical device. For example, you always take me for granted. That would be the type of thing that is not literally true, but it could be used in that way. Okay, let's look at another two sentences that both have essentially the same function, but with two different words. So the first sentence is 我想点面包还想点啤酒. Right, so that would mean I would like to order bread and also beer. The next sentence is 下午我想吃面包也想吃鱼. Right, so this would mean I want to eat bread in the afternoon and I also want to eat fish. Now, a question that might come up is, why are we separating it? Why would you just not say 我想点面包和啤酒? So that sentence is just connecting 面包 and 啤酒 with 和. So that's just I want to order bread and beer. So why would you have the other one that kind of separates them by using 还 or 也? Well, 还 and 也emphasize that the speaker also wants something in a sequence. So the frequency of it is that they also want that, which means that they need to add that second item to emphasize there's some distinction there. For example, in the first sentence, the speaker wants to maybe make clear a distinction between their food order and their drink order, which is kind of a thing that you might do at a restaurant. Usually you'll order drinks first and then you'll order food after. Or if you want to order all at once, you could imagine somebody saying, they say their food order and they go, oh yeah, and also I want beer. And then the second sentence might be that the speaker is trying to express that typically bread would be enough for them to eat in the afternoon, but in this case, they also want to eat fish. Now, it's not necessarily written into the sentence, but that's the type of context where you might use either of those. So both 还 and 也 emphasize also. They get across also, and usually there's some type of sequence involved or some sort of need to emphasize the distinction between the two things you're saying. Now let's move on to sentence number 5. Here's the sentence. 我想再吃一个这种面包. So here we use 再, which means again. So the frequency here is just to do something once and then do it again. So 再 before an action communicates that you've done it before and you want to do it again either now or in the future. And while English usually places again at the end of the sentence, Chinese stays consistent by placing the adverb before the action. So we tend to go, I want to eat one piece of this type of bread again, but they will say, I'd like to again eat one piece of this type of bread. So that's when you use 在 for that. Now we're going to go back to 在 in a minute because 在 only refers to things that could be happening again in the present or the future, not the past, but we'll get to that in a moment. Next sentence here is 我经常交朋友. So this is very similar to 常常. I often make friends. Now, 经常 and 常常, the only major difference is that sometimes 经常 can be used in an adjective form, but we'll talk about that somewhere else because this is just all about adverbs today. But the negative for both 经常 and 常常 is 不常. So if you want to say that something does not often happen, you could just change it to 不常, and the sentence suddenly turns to 我不常交朋友. I don't often make friends. And whether it's 常常 or 经常, there's no 不经常, it's only 不常. 不常 is the opposite. Now, sentence number 7 here, this is bringing it back to that idea of how do you express again as a matter of frequency. Well, if you're explaining something and you're trying to say that something happened again in the past, you'll use the character 又. 写得不完美. 我又写了一次. So it's not written perfectly, I wrote it again. So the important thing to note when using 又 is that Chinese makes a distinction between things that happened again and things that will happen again. It's a question of the past versus the present and future. And so in the above sentence, it's that the rewriting is already complete. And that's why we say 我又写了一次. Now compare these three sentences to get an idea of how this worked. Here's sentence 1. 我写了一次. I wrote it once. Next sentence. 我又写了一次. I wrote it again. Final sentence. 我再写一次. I will write it again. And so that's the difference between 又 and 再. And they both mean again, they're both adverbs of frequency, but the main difference is the future versus the past. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are plenty of other adverbs of frequency, and I've listed a bunch of them below. There's loads. And any of these you could theoretically put into the slot of where the adverb goes and change the meaning of the sentence. So for example, 从不 and 从来不 both mean never, so they're adverbs indicating low frequency. Then there's a bunch of adverbs that indicate medium frequency. I'll leave it to you to look at all of them, but the one I want to point out here is 有时候, 有时候, because that one means sometimes, and that's a really common word of frequency to use. So for example, 我有时候想点面包 would mean I sometimes want to order bread. So you get the idea there that 有时候, it literally means there are times, have times. So sometimes, it's pretty straightforward. And then there's also some adverbs that indicate really high frequency. Again, I'll leave it to you to look at all of the different ones you could use, but the one I want to point out here is 一直. 一直 means continuously or always or has always. So if somebody were to say, 他一直很开朗, that would mean that person has always been lovely and open-hearted and wonderful, right? And so by saying 一直, you're indicating that it's always been the case, it's continuously happened. The only difference between 一直 and 总是 is that 一直 implies that there hasn't really been a stoppage in it, whereas, for example, 你总是吃米饭 just means, it's kind of like implies that when you eat, you always eat rice. But it's not like you're continuously eating rice all the time. That would be kind of funny. 他一直吃米饭 would mean literally you're just continuously eating rice, just never stops. And so that would be, that person wouldn't be very long for this world. So that's the grammar tag, GW, how does what, how often, 副词频率。谢谢你观看我们的这个视频。If you found this video valuable and you'd like us to help you reach fluency and literacy in Mandarin Chinese as fast as possible without all the headache of traditional learning methods, just head to mandarinblueprint.com to learn more. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell below to be notified every time we release a new video. And of course, 保重